So in today's video, I'm going to be showing you how we can convert a regular iPhone into what is, in my opinion, one of the best dumb phone solutions currently available. Now, I'm not such a fan of the term dumb phone, but I seem to see it everywhere these days. And I think this is partly because people seem to really be wanting to redefine their relationship with technology. I think people want to get back to a time when a phone was like a tool, like a film camera or a bike, as opposed to something that can be a big distraction, is something that's competing for our attention. And I find that sometimes when one thing does everything, it's hard to do anything because you're constantly in this world of endless possibility. It can actually cause a sense of paralysis. And as someone who has been on a journey over the last few years of trying to renegotiate that balance and find a healthy way of using technology that doesn't take up my time and allows me the space in my life I need to kind of live more mindfully and have the room to create and listen to ideas as they appear, this is something I really wanted to make a video on. I've used the Lightphone 2. I had that for a couple of years. I've had a flip phone and nothing else for a while. And I've had two phones, smartphones, all kinds of different variations, trying to figure out a way of using technology in a way that didn't control my life. And I finally found for the last year a solution in converting an iPhone into a dumb phone, as I'm going to show you in this video, that seems to have really done the job and has really given me a lot more space and made a lot of positive changes in my life. Now, one of the main reasons I wanted to make this video is because when I see reviews of dumb phones like the Lightphone 3, one of the biggest criticisms I see is, why would you spend X amount of hundreds of dollars for a phone that does less than the standard iPhone? And I think that's a really valid point. Whilst I understand that these companies are smaller companies and so they have smaller production batches driving up the costs, it does make it very inaccessible for people who just either want to try out making a change with how they use their phone, or people who want to adopt a different kind of phone for their day-to-day usage. And so why I think it's important to share this is because whilst this isn't specific necessarily to iPhone, I think a lot of people out there who maybe want to make a change probably already possess the technology required to do so, but just perhaps don't have the know-how or are a bit overwhelmed by where to start. And so what I want to do in this video is just show you how you can take the phone you already have or a similar phone and essentially convert it into a ideal minimalist device that you have control over, what you have access to, and is actually very effective at forcing you to stick to that. And so without any more delay, let's get into it. So what we have here is an iPhone SE 2022. I really like this phone because it has the original sort of iPhone look. It has the Touch ID, which I find a lot better than the Face ID. It's got a nice, small, sleek, thin design compared to some of the more modern iPhones, and it isn't overwhelming. You know, it just has one camera, and I guess it's just, you know, it does everything I need it to do without having too much that I feel is being wasted by using the phone in this way. Now, I also have a matte screen protector on this phone, which I actually really love. It gives it that kind of e-ink look and kind of display that the Lightphone has, but also just makes it a lot more pleasant to look at. You know, you don't have the reflective kind of shiny look that you usually would get with an iPhone. It gives you more of a kind of sleek feel and adds a really interesting texture when you're using the phone that at first is a bit jarring, but you get used to. Now, I actually got the idea of using a matte screen protector in another YouTube video, so I'll be sure to link that down in the description. Now, later on, I'm going to briefly talk about how I use the camera on this phone when I have this as my only means of capturing videos and photos. But I just quickly want to mention that I do with this phone use just this cheap clip-on fisheye lens that I've been using for a few years now, which I'll just have in my pocket. And if I just want to get video, I'll just chuck that on there. Now, if you've watched videos like this in the past, this is going to look pretty familiar, but I'm just going to run you through the setup I have on this phone. So on my home screen here, I have two pages. On the first, we have some essential apps that I've selected, and on the second one, we just have a continuation of that. And we have a nice weather widget on the top here, and then just the date on the second page. And this just shows me the weather for the week. Down the bottom, I have camera in the middle, text, and then phone call. And that's pretty much that simple. And this is basically everything I have on the phone. So I have maps, notes, music, podcasts, and then we have Remarkable, which pairs with my paper tablet, which I use for scripts and kind of keeping everything organized, signing documents, stuff like that. The settings of the phone, photos, and then my bank app so that I can transfer money. And basically the idea behind this is obviously we're sort of mimicking a dumb phone or like a light phone kind of UI Now, what I really like about this is actually similar to something I heard Cillian Murphy say in an interview. There's something very nice about having a phone that is just very simple and doesn't have loads of colourful, bright things all over the screen, but it's just very sleek and to the point. And so here, if I want to use notes, I can just click on notes and it'll just open the application, and it's just as straightforward as that. There's no kind of frills, there's no kind of crazy visuals going on. It's very simple. And as you see, and we'll get onto this in the settings, but the whole phone is on grayscale, meaning that by default there's no color, but I've set it up so if I tap the back of the phone 3 times, I can then get color. So if someone texts me a photo and I want to look at it, or if I'm filming, I can have color, but as soon as I'm done, I can just tap 3 times and it'll go back to black and white. Now on this phone, I've blocked all internet access apart from a few specific websites that I've specified. And so when I set the phone, I basically added a list of websites, and I'll show you how to do this in a moment. And once you put websites on that list and then lock it from that point on, that's all the phone is going to be able to access. I also disabled the ability to install new applications or go on the App Store. So I decided everything I'd need and then installed that all on the phone, set it all up, and then locked off installing new applications from that moment forward. Just to show you how this looks, if I go ahead and find Safari and go onto Safari here, essentially if I were to try and go on Google, so I put google.com in and I press search, what you'll see happen is it's basically going to lock it, and it just says allow password, so I might go ahead and try and allow it, but you see what's going to happen is it comes out of a screen time password, and I actually do not know this password, which we'll get onto in a moment. But doing this just means that this phone absolutely is locked off and I cannot access anything apart from the websites that I've specified. So for example, this is our production company website. So on here, I can come on here and basically see this website because it's on my allowed list, but everything else will be blocked. So on this phone, I also have music and podcasts, like I mentioned. So for that, I just have the Apple Podcasts app if I want to listen to podcasts, which just does really well. I can download them obviously just to the phone, store them locally, or just like listen online if I'm on the internet. Now I also listen to music on here quite a lot, and I have the Apple Music installed onto the phone, but I don't actually use the streaming and I don't have a subscription, but I just store music locally. So I'm a big fan of the iPod, and I use an iPod quite a lot to listen to music. So on this phone I have just some of my iTunes library from CDs I've burnt, etc., basically stored on here, and just some local music. So here's some of my own music just as an example, and it just would play normally as you would if you were listening to just Apple Music, but it's all stored locally on the phone, which I really like. So just listen to some Cat Stevens. Now for the cool kind of menu that I have going on here, I am basically using a few different apps. Now there's loads of apps out there that do this and lots of tutorials covering it, so I'm just going to kind of briefly go through it. But on this particular phone, I'm using 3 different apps. I'm using an app called Blank, I'm using an app called Dumbify, and one called Minimal Launcher. You don't have to use all 3, you can literally just use one of these, but the only reason I have 3 is because, for example, I really love this widget here with the weather on the screen, and that comes on the Blank app. But then I prefer the, I think it was a free app I used. I think it was either Dumbify or Minimal Launcher, I'm not sure, but it was either free or a one-time small purchase to unlock the app. But either way, go and have a look on the App Store or the Android Store and just type in like Dumb Phone or Minimalist Launcher, and you'll find a whole array of different applications that allow you to do this. And most of them are going to be free. Some will be paid, but I think maybe with the exception of Blank or a couple like that, they essentially aren't going to be subscription-based models. And if they are, you can find one that isn't. But essentially how it works is you go into the application, you can custom design widgets that will basically point to different applications you have, and then essentially you just come onto your home screen and you just remove all the applications, hide them from the home screen, and then just place these widgets down instead. So just to quickly show you inside one of these apps, they look like this, where essentially you can add applications, add widgets, and basically create custom ones if they don't show up, but most of them are already on here ready to be kind of added in. And once you add them in, you basically can then rearrange how the widgets are going to look. And as you see, you have 3 different widgets that you can create here. And there's all tutorials and stuff showing you how to do it. I've also taken off the animations, which really helps the phone just look simple. So like when you're changing between apps or double tapping, instead of having the kind of the smooth animation you usually would, it's just basically very simple. And I really like that. Now, oddly, one of my favorite things about this phone is the fact that it is black and white and it's grayscale. And I actually find that not having the bright colors actually really helps eliminate kind of screen fatigue and allows me to use the phone without kind of getting I guess, overwhelmed if I'm kind of having to do quite a lot or write stuff down. And it does have that kind of e-ink feel, especially alongside the matte screen protector. So I'm just going to show you how to set this up. So we're going to go into the phone settings, and essentially in accessibility, there is a option to turn on color filters for people who have visual impairments. Now, just to save some time, I'm just going to search for it. So I'm going to type in color filters. And as you see, color filters comes up here. And if we click on it, as you see, it's turned on. We can turn it off, turn it back on, and essentially you have an option of all these different kind of filters, obviously for people with different levels of color blindness or visual impairments, but we're going to put it on grayscale and turn it on. Now, if you just want the phone to be permanently black and white, you can do that, or you can just come in here and turn it on and off each time. Now, what's also really cool is that we can set it up like I showed you earlier, so that we can do a triple or a double tap on the back of the phone, and this will automatically toggle it on and off without having to come into our settings. So just to demonstrate that, if I tap 3 times, you see it switches it to black and white. And again, this works anywhere. So if we're on the home screen, for example, tap it 3 times and we're going to get color. Now, to do this, we're going to go back into our settings and we're going to basically search for triple tap. And as you see, it's this top one here. So in here, it takes us to accessibility and back tap. You basically have the option to set something up for a double tap or a triple tap. I've obviously just got this set to triple tap. So you basically click on it. And in this case, I've scrolled down to accessibility and I've selected color filters. And with that turned on, it'll basically allow us just to tap 3 times and toggle this on and off, which is a really cool feature. Now, given the fact that the main goal of this channel is to talk about films and to share my film work, it would be wrong if I didn't mention the camera on this phone. Now, what I wanted to do with this phone is essentially treat it as, I guess, a bit like a point and shoot style camera. Now, I've never been too big of a fan of the iPhone and how the iPhone looks, or any smartphone for that matter. I've never really been into how it tends to sharpen the image. And every time I see iPhone footage, with the exception of some of the modern pro cameras, you can always just tell it's iPhone footage. And so I kind of wanted to find a way of shooting video on this phone that felt more analog, or felt more like the process that you would have if you used an old DV camera back in the 90s or the early 2000s. Now, I achieved this in 2 ways. The first way is by using physical lenses like the fisheye lens I showed you earlier. This just gives it a look that looks very different from the iPhone, and obviously we get some cool lens flares, and unlike trying to use an anamorphic lens to try and make it look more cinematic, we're kind of leaning into a kind of more indie aesthetic. And I also film onto a different app than the regular camera app. This is an app that I might do a video on separately, but it's something I've been using literally since, I want to say, 2014, and that's the 8mm app. I don't ever hear this spoken about much, and there was a lot of buzz around this app back in the day because it was used on a documentary, Finding Sugar Man, that got into Sundance. Now, whilst I know this app won't be for everyone, I've always been a big fan of it. It gives you some really cool film looks. It gives you a good level of control over all the settings without being overwhelming. It lets you shoot in different resolutions, aspect ratios, things like that. Now, when I shoot, I quite often shoot in 4:3 aspect ratio of a 2-strip look, a little bit of grain, and with the fisheye lens. And I'm really pleased with the kind of filmic look it gives me. And I feel that it really accurately captures the feeling of where I've been, or at least stirs a strong feeling of nostalgia in me when I watch it back. And that brings me joy, so that's how I do it. I sometimes also shoot in 480p or 720p on this, purely just because whilst I could shoot in higher resolution, actually shooting in a lower resolution, not only does it save me immense amounts of space, but also, it just has that kind of that vintage feel that for me is very nostalgic, because so much of my life was captured on that format. So that's the kind of settings I use to film video on this camera. And as you've been seeing on the screen, it doesn't really look like most iPhone footage. It has its very own unique feeling, and I really like this. And quite often if I show people footage shot on it, they're like, how did you shoot that? So I just wanted to share that because I just think that's a cool little thing. And I may do a separate video, and let me know if you're interested in seeing a separate video on this app or on iPhone cinematography, because whilst obviously in this case we're looking at kind of going for a kind of lo-fi look, also iPhones obviously have increasingly become better tools for filmmaking, and that's something which I'm quite keen to dive into soon. So now the last thing, and I suppose the most important thing that I'm going to mention, is basically how to lock off internet access, how to lock off installing new applications. Now, all of this is done within screen time. Now, you may already use it to a certain degree, But essentially, if you don't, screen time is basically Apple's tool for, I guess, parental controls or just self-imposed ways of setting limitations on what the phone can do. You can set this up to specific times of day, so you can have it so that certain applications are blocked after a certain hour of the day, or things turn on or off after certain points. But you can also take more extreme measures with it, which is what I'm going to be doing today. So essentially what I've done on this phone is, like I say, I've set it up so I cannot access any websites apart from one specified, and I cannot install applications or go on the iTunes store. So to do this, if we come into our settings again, and we're going to come down to screen time here, and in screen time here, you basically have a whole array of things linked to kind of your phone usage. This is a really cool kind of place to look around all the settings. You know, you can see your web activity and how long you spend on the phone, stuff like that. So we're going to go to content and privacy restrictions. And as you see, I've got it turned on here. And so under iTunes and App Store purchases, don't allow. I'm allowed to delete apps. I'm allowed in-app purchases. And again, you could tweak this to whatever your needs are. But this basically means that when this is switched on and when it's locked, there is no way of me installing new applications. Now, if we come to Store, Web, Siri, and Game Center content, so here we essentially have the option to change the access. Now, some of these are just random as I've been experimenting with them, but essentially it gives you the option to dial in if you want access to music, podcasts, and news. Basically, you know, are you allowed access to explicit books that have swearing and adult themes? Are you allowed music videos of explicit themes and swearing, or do you want to turn that off? So let's say you have a child and you don't want them to access music or music videos that have an explicit nature to them. This is a really great tool for doing that. Or if you have, let's say, addictions with adult content, this is another great way of, I guess, let's say doing a detox or kind of removing access to that kind of content. Now, some of these I have set to kind of random ones, like I don't use books on the phone, for example, but if I did, I might go and tweak it to whatever I needed. Web content, now this is where it's really important. If we click on here, we essentially have it so that we can have either unrestricted, which means just normal phone usage, limit adult websites, which obviously blocks adult websites, or only approved websites. Now, I like to do only approved websites, and basically when I set the phone up, I just basically, because I'm not going to be using this phone for web browsing, I only just put in my production company website just so I can go and check when I do new updates on the site. But here, for example, you could add in your bank, and maybe, you know, if you trade, let's say you could put the trading website, or, you know, certain applications, let's say you don't want the application or you want access to just specific websites, like Wikipedia or something, then you could add a list of all the websites you want and cut out everything else. Now, there was a time until a recent upgrade that essentially, even if you blocked, let's say, web content in these settings, if you opened another application that allowed you to browse, it would bypass these settings, which kind of always put me off. And it's one of the reasons why I guess I never really thought that an iPhone could be a good backup for a dumb phone. But in a recent update a couple of years ago, they essentially changed this. So now this works throughout the entire phone. So even if you try and cheat and get around it, there's no way. Once it's locked, it is locked. And whilst experimenting, whilst making this video, I was unable to find any way around these settings once they're locked. Now, how this works is once you've gone in and you've tweaked all the settings that you want, you've decided what you don't want to have access to, what you want to allow, you then have the option to lock this setting with a custom passcode. So you'll set that up, and then once you've got that passcode set, if you want to turn this off or change any of the settings, you physically cannot without putting in the passcode. So the problem is, of course, if you really want to get around this and start going on YouTube or Instagram, and the whole point of this phone is to detox, of course, what you're going to do is you're just going to turn it off. And depending on your level of self-control, quite often you're just going to, I just need to check that one thing on Instagram or whatever it might be. You'll just put in the password and that's that. So what I've done here, and as silly as it may sound, it has actually been the one thing that's been so effective, is I do not know the screen time password to this phone. And that's kind of the catch, and that's kind of the thing that I think I haven't really seen mentioned in other videos. And it's obviously a simple thing, but it really is super effective, because it essentially means that I cannot change, once I've locked it, any of the settings. Now, there's two ways you can do this. Now, in my case, somebody in my life who I trust knows the password, but also knows how serious I am about being offline when I want to be offline. So if I desperately need to change it, I can go to that person, ask them to put the password in, and then I can make edits to access, or I can allow a new app or whatever it is. But as it's such a fiasco to have to contact that person and go through that and say, can you please put the password in, I tend not to. And so unless there's something really major that needs a change, I won't. Now, this could be a friend, it could be a partner, it could be a sibling or a parent. But the point is you find someone that you really trust, or you do this with somebody else and you kind of have them as an accountability partner of, trying to have a social media detox or whatever it may be that your goal is. But what it essentially means is that if there's some reason that you absolutely need to get into the phone, then you can. But otherwise, you don't know how. Now, if you're sure that this is absolutely how you want your phone, and you know that you're not going to need to change anything, you don't want to update the phone, and you're happy with the apps on their current versions and everything like that, or you have auto updates turned on, then essentially what you can do is just come up with a password that you're deliberately going to forget. So you set it twice, and then you just don't remember it, and then we have someone else set it and just never tell you and have them forget it. So there's various ways you can do this, and obviously some are more extreme than others. If you have the self-control, you could just kind of turn this on and off as and when you need. But in my case, it's really helped just having someone else know the password, just so there's an extra step between me being able to, I'm just going to go on Instagram, or I'm going to go on YouTube and just spend an hour watching, videos or reels or whatever it is. So one other thing to mention though is that if you decide to do this, if you put the password in wrong enough times, it does give you the option to reset it through iCloud. So the same goes. And in this case, I have a special iCloud that I just made, just like a burner iCloud account on just an email address, again, that I just don't have access to, or it would be a pain for me to go and find the password because I don't have it saved. And so on this phone, I don't have it linked to my iCloud because in my case, I don't need to. And so I just have a special spare phone iCloud account that means that if I want to change the password and I try and bypass that system, again, I just can't because I don't know the login. So you kind of end up with a phone that essentially actually is a dumb phone. It physically will not allow me to access those modern smartphone features that put me off. So instead of it being like a half measure where I have a phone, but really I can change it back to a smartphone, I essentially have built an iPhone here that really is just exactly what I want, the tools I need and nothing else. And whilst in my specific case, I can get around it if I really try and I go and ask people, I literally haven't for a year purely because I don't need to, and it's just too much of a faff and an annoyance to go to someone and say, hey, can you keep putting the password into this phone? So again, there's different degrees to that, but that's how this phone is set up, and that's what's really worked for me. Now, one thing I'd quickly like to touch on is just something that I've found quite difficult, and I think a lot of people do, and I think it's one of the main reasons people wouldn't look into a phone like this, is the demands of work versus taking time for yourself. Now, I know this is a much deeper issue, but something that can be quite difficult is allowing yourself that freedom to kind of go off grid and to take the time you need to kind of recharge whilst there are demands of work. Now, being someone who works in film, it can be quite a challenge because if, let's say, I'm producing something or working on a project, I need to be available all of the time. So, for example, recently we were working on something and I was directing and producing, and that obviously came with a lot of responsibility, and I had to be coordinating a lot of stuff. Now, fortunately, there were other producers on the project, so it wasn't just me alone having to deal with this big production, but I did have to be answering lots of questions and kind of, staying in the loop constantly. What I've been doing is, if I'm in a period of my life where I've got a lot on and I've got loads of projects to manage that require me to be, I guess, online or locked in, I kind of will have a second phone. So I have a phone that kind of, it still has restrictions on it, but it essentially has access to my WhatsApp, my work email, everything, to do with the company, that essentially allows me to stay on track of it if I'm out and about or on set or moving around. And so quite often, when in the recent project, if I was out location scouting, I could send a voice note quickly on WhatsApp to the group chat and have the other producers hear it. And so we could all kind of discuss on the go. And whilst it's a bit startling to go from a peaceful kind of using a phone to suddenly being in this different state, which feels quite manic, it is quite an effective way of separating the two. And that's what I quite like, because before I did this, I had just one phone. And as soon as I taught my brain I could turn the settings off, I just kept turning the settings off. And so for me, what's really worked is keeping them separate. Now, obviously, I know it's a luxury having a second phone, and that's not something which I'm suggesting for everyone. But obviously, I'm in a situation where for my work it's needed. But what's been really good about it is that using that second phone means that the work can just be locked away in a drawer or turned off until I next need it. Now, if you're a digital creator or you have to maintain an online or social media presence, there's a few ways you can do this while still kind of being mindful and blocking access to algorithmic social media platforms that are going to take up too much of your time. Now I'm going to be showing this to you on my work phone here, but of course you could do this on any phone. And essentially these are just a couple of tools that I use to still be able to manage my content, view it and interact with comments and whatnot, while still blocking access to the platforms themselves. So for Instagram and Facebook, I use Meta Business Suite. This is one of those apps I think a lot of people actually haven't heard about unless they've run a business or advertised on the Meta platform. But essentially it allows you to manage and view the content of a public Instagram or Facebook account, and also to message followers on that account. So essentially here, for example, on my Instagram account, I can see all my posts, I can click on them and get analytical breakdowns of everything that's going on. I can go into my messages and I can reply to messages and talk to friends if I want to. I can post new content or schedule it. So for example, if I want to go into stories, I can create a new story, and if I wanted to, I could go ahead and post this and have all access to the same tools that I would on Instagram. But essentially the great thing here is that you cannot see other people's content. So you can manage your own content, you can talk to your followers and friends, but essentially beyond that, you cannot see the actual Instagram platform itself. And so this is a great way of maintaining an online social presence without having to get sucked into the Instagram platform and wasting time. Now for YouTube, this one is more common, but I use the YouTube Studio app, and that essentially does the same thing. It lets me post content, let's say if I wanted to post something from my phone. And so what's great is I can come into here, I can click on a video, for example, and I can make changes. So I could make it unlisted, or I could change the description on it, or add it to a playlist, but I cannot access the YouTube home feed. I can only see my own content. And so this is a great way of still being able to reply to comments or to keep in touch with people without having to access YouTube directly. So I just wanted to wrap this video up by talking a little bit about how I've been using this device. And whilst I know this is something that's probably going to vary a lot from person to person, just sharing some of the ways that I've been using it, some of the ways it's been helpful, will hopefully inspire or, influence or, give some ideas to people who perhaps are just starting out on a journey of trying to, create more space in their life. Now, the reason I think it's so important, and I sort of touched on it earlier, but the reason I made this video is purely because I think some of the best things creatively can happen to people when they have space and when they allow room in their life. Now, I think increasingly we live in a busy and a stressful world to the extent that it can be so hard to receive new ideas because we're so kind of caught up in the hamster wheel of life. And I think taking any opportunity we can to just create a bit of space and create a bit of room to just sit, to still, to meditate, whatever it is that, gets you to a place where you have room and you can kind of absorb and take life in a way that allows you to fire up your imagination and feel creative, I think is a really important thing to kind of nurture and to kind of make space for. Now there are things like listening to music. I found that I was in a state where I always listen to music whilst scrolling, or I'd listen to music whilst on the move or doing something else. And whilst music can be a very good tool to kind of keep you locked in or whatever it may be, I do find that if I sit back, I shut my eyes, I have a good pair of headphones and actually listen to music properly, the experience is so much greater. I actually take in things, I get inspired in different ways, because instead of just using it as background noise, I'm actually making it the focal point, and I'm hearing, oh, listen what they're doing with that guitar, listen, with this instrumentation or whatever it may be. And as a musician and as a producer, that's also something that's really important. And the same goes for films. If you're watching a film and you're able to just sit there and watch it, I'm sure if you go to the cinema or you've been to the cinema, there's a very different experience watching a film theatrically and watching a film at home, because at home you've got all these distractions going on and I missed that. But I've had the experience before where I've seen a film over and over at home, and then I'll go and see it in the cinema and I'll see all these things I didn't see before. And a lot of it is obviously it's a bigger screen, but it's also because there's nothing distracting me and I'm just locked in watching it and it's just me and the film. And I think engaging with art and media in that way is very important to kind of have a real perspective, because whilst it's good to be able to enjoy it on a higher level, I think it also allows you to listen to yourself and to listen to how you're responding to it. Because I think, for example, let's say you're watching the news all the time and there's certain trends of news or political stuff that you're watching that perhaps is negative for you, if you allow yourself the space and the room to hear how it's affecting you, then I think that level of mindfulness can be such an important tool, not just for creating, but just sort of leading you in life. And I think for some people, it may be a matter of completely cutting everything off and having a very strict phone that just has phone calls, text, and that's it, you know. But for other people, it may just be as simple as putting a timer on. And so, you know, 2 hours before bed, you can't go on social media, and you can take those 2 hours to do some reading or to just, you know, reflect. You know, it can be a small change. And obviously I use a drastic example, and that's personally what has been helpful for me. But essentially, ultimately, this isn't a one size fits all kind of thing, because much like I said with the work demands, you know, everyone has different needs and different levels of access that they can't avoid. And if that's the case, then it's, I think, just a matter of beginning a journey of finding, is this serving me the way I'm using technology? If not, how can I change that? You know, what are the limitations to that? And finding workarounds and ways to work around that to just enhance your quality of life wherever you are. And so whilst I know this can be somewhat divisive for some people, because obviously it's quite a personal thing how we use technology, you know, if this is something that you try and you get value from, or something you have tried and that you liked or you didn't like, then let me know. I think it's a really interesting thing to have a discussion about. And that doesn't necessarily mean here in YouTube. That just means in general. I mean, with your friends or wherever it may be, I think it's just an interesting discussion to have. And I think talking about things like this are just going to enhance everyone's quality of life. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope it's given you something of value. I'll be back to doing my usual kind of filmmaking tutorials / videos soon, but I just had seen some stuff about this, and I kind of, having had a personal experience with it, I just thought I wanted to share my approach and what had worked for me in the hopes that it could bring value to someone else. So until next time, thank you very much.